So recently, I attended in person the trial of the nurse Lucy Letby at Manchester Crown Court. In this video, I'm going to be outlining my experience having been present at Lucy Letby's last day under cross-examination, and in the interest of a fair trial and the fact that this trial at this point in time is still ongoing, I will only be discussing with you what the jury has already seen and heard. So the first topic that I'm going to touch upon is Lucy Letby, the individual. How does she sound? How does she come across in person? Has her appearance changed? And I think the first thing that was noticeable is that she doesn't really look like any of her previous photographs. The one that she closest resembles now is the one that you see in front of you. Now her hair's ever so slightly longer, it's down to around about her shoulders, it's a little bit darker, and it's very straight. Those were the first things that stood out to me having been there in person. Also, her face is a little bit fuller. It's a little bit rounder than what you see in this photograph. Now, that's not to say that she's put on some massive amount of weight or anything like that, but her face does appear ever so slightly fuller. In terms of her speech, she's quite well spoken, quite articulate, quite softly spoken at times, and very level. Very level. That was one thing that stood out to me. Her responses, the way she articulates, the way she answers questions is for the vast majority of the time very level. So as I say, I'm not going to go into too much detail about this. I'm going to expand on this greatly once the trial has concluded, but for obvious reasons, as this is currently an ongoing trial, I am limited as to what I can and can't say. So now I'm going to move on to some of the points which were touched upon during the cross-examination on June the 9th. So let's touch upon the first topic on June the 9th when Lucy Letby was in her last day of cross-examination, and it stated the following. Mr. Johnson is asking Miss Letby about the 27th of June 2016. This followed the collapse of her final alleged victim, child Q, on June 25th. She was told by the manager of the unit not to come in for her shift. In messages from the time, she tells colleagues she is, quote, panicked. So I'm going to expand and add a little bit of context into this just so that you can understand a little bit better what is being spoken about here. So first of all, Mr. Johnson touched upon the fact that Lucy Letby was on a day off the day before, on June the 26th. And on June the 27th in the evening, Lucy Letby receives a phone call from her manager. The manager says, don't come in for your night shift this evening. And after this telephone call, Lucy Letby starts to exchange messages with a male doctor and telling him that she felt, quote, overwhelmed and panicked, and that she was having a meltdown plus, as it's stated in her text messages. So at this point in time, Mr. Johnson says, you knew that they were onto you, didn't you? And Letby replies, no. And then messages are then read out to the court. There's a message which states the following. I can't talk about this now. And then she wrote 12 minutes later back to this male doctor, sorry, that was rude, felt completely overwhelmed and panicked for a minute. We all worked tirelessly and did everything possible. I don't see how anyone can question that. I'm having a meltdown plus, but think that's what I need to do. Mr. Johnson then said, well, explain to me how you were feeling. It's saying here that you were having a meltdown plus. Explain that. How were you feeling? And she said, yes, I was upset. And he said, is a meltdown the same thing, being upset, having a meltdown? And she said, yes, I was very upset. To which he replied, oh, you were very upset. So you were very upset. You were having a meltdown. What sort of meltdown were you having? What grade of meltdown were you having at this time? And then she said, well, quite a dramatic one according to this. So then he says, well, explain to me what a dramatic meltdown is. To which she replied, a dramatic meltdown? Where have I said that? He said, well, you said that about 20 seconds ago. And she said, well, yes, I was very upset. I didn't know what was going on. And he said, so this tiny phone call was enough to make you have a plus meltdown just because you were told not to come in for your night shift? And she said, yes, I didn't know what was going on. It was very out of the ordinary to have a phone call from a member of the management team out of hours. This is a member of the management, someone high up, and they're calling me out of hours. Yes, I was concerned that I had done something wrong. So at this point in time, Mr. Johnson then brings up a note which was written on Letby's phone on the same evening, just a few hours after these text messages were exchanged between Letby and her male doctor colleague at 11:29 p.m. And it stated the following. Def Datix ×2, Datix no bicarb delay in IO access, sign out FFP on Meditech and Pink Chart, Child O charts OBS, fluids in sluice, signed drugs, signed Curacao out, traffic light drug compatibility. Mr. Johnson says, so why have you written these notes on your phone? To which Letby replied, this was a list of documents that she had not yet completed for babies she had cared for. To which Mr. Johnson replied, you had your thinking cap on, didn't you? To which Letby replied, yes, I didn't know what was going on. Mr. Johnson then moves a few days after this event to June the 30th. So again, to put this in context and into some kind of timeline, we have Lucy Letby told not to go back to work on June the 27th. That evening, she writes that note on her phone regarding a list of documents that she needs to complete for babies that she's cared for. Then a few days after this, she fills in a Datix form. Now, for anyone who doesn't know what a Datix form is, basically it's a form that can be used to report an issue, basically. So it's like a complaint form of some description, or a form which can be filled in to report an issue. So a Datix form for the clinical incident is shown to the court. It's dated June the 30th, 2016 at 3 p.m, with the port on one of the lumens noted not to have a bung on the end and was therefore open. Registrar informed. Letby is the reporter of the incident. Mr. Johnson says this was a potential case of accidental air embolus which Letby had reported. He then said again, you had your thinking cap on, didn't you? To which Letby replied, no. Letby said this was something which needed to be reported. Basically, she said, I remember this at the time, she said, no, it was something that I found and I felt it needed to be recorded. It needed to be reported. And Nicholas Johnson then said, you removed the port and covered it as a clinical incident, didn't you? To which Letby responded, no. Lucy Letby then tells the court she was feeling isolated and wasn't able to speak to anybody on the unit. Mr. Johnson then asks her if that was really the case. To which Letby replied that she had spoke to some friends who she was allowed to speak to about the details of the investigation, and these were 2 nursing colleagues and a doctor. Letby's text message is then shown to the court. Quote, it's making me feel I should hide away by not speaking to anyone and going on for months, etc. I haven't done anything wrong. Nicholas Johnson then says, you knew at this stage you were being blamed for the collapses and deaths of these children. To which Letby replies, no. So at this point, Mr. Johnson then went on to discuss each case individually very briefly, and then he reverted back to talking about Lucy Letby's suspension from the unit. Mr. Johnson says Letby had given evidence surrounding her suspension from the unit in her first day of giving evidence to the defence. She had said she had felt very isolated from her friends and family on the unit, and her mental health had deteriorated. Lucy Letby had said, we were a very supportive unit. Regardless of whether we were personal friends, we were a supportive unit. At the time, the hospital advised me not to contact anyone on the unit. There were 2 or 3 friends I could contact, but not to contact anyone else on the unit. Letby is asked if that statement is still true, and she said yes, and that she abided by that. And then she added that that did change as time went on. Now, I'm going to expand on this because, again, this wasn't really expanded on during the live reporting. So what happened is that Mr. Johnson was saying, you have told the defence, you made in your defence statement, or you said in your defence statement, that you were only allowed to see 3 individuals. 1 was a male doctor, and there were 2 nursing colleagues. And then as he was getting towards the end of that sentence, Letby sort of cut over him and said, yeah, but that did change as time went on. And then he said, no, that's not what you have told this jury. You told the jury that you were only allowed to see the male doctor and 2 nursing colleagues. And she said, well, I was informed that this was relaxed. I could see other individuals, but I couldn't speak to them about the investigation. And as I say, Nicholas Johnson almost cut her off and said, no, that is not what you have said. You have said that you were isolated, you were kept away from your friends and family, and you were only allowed to see 3 individuals. Mr. Johnson then asks Letby about the document she had received that morning. Letby said yes, that she had received a document regarding her social life from the prosecution. Mr. Johnson then says it disproves everything that Letby had said, to which Letby disagrees. Quote, you were telling the jury a sob story that you'd been cut off from your family, as you called them, on the unit. And Letby disagrees. Were you looking for sympathy? And Letby replied, yes, it was a very difficult time. Nicholas Johnson then says, was it just a mistake? And Letby replies, yes. So just to clarify what he means there. Was it just a mistake? He's referring to the fact that She was allowed to speak to other people, but she didn't make that particularly clear, or she didn't even mention it actually in her defence. So that was an interesting point, but as I say, not particularly well expanded on during the live reporting. The document includes photos of Letby's nights and days out with colleagues, and Mr. Johnson says they include a trip to London with a male doctor. Letby says that happened once. So I'm going to expand on what that's all about. So to the court, it was put up on the screen and it was almost like an Excel spreadsheet. So you've got loads and loads of text messages. I think this was around 26 or 27 pages long. And it had a lot of Lucy Letby's messages, WhatsApp messages, and also on there was around 5 or 6 photos from memory. And none of these were enlarged at the time, but they were sort of thumbnail size, and they were like photos of cocktails, her friends, nights out. You know, like when you take a random photograph of like a cocktail or your pint of beer or whatever. It's kind of like that. And these were shown to the court. And yeah, so that's basically what the document was. It had a lot of text messages about her social life, diary entries, WhatsApp messages, Facebook messages. And again, just to reiterate what was in that document, the document includes photos of Letby's nights out and days out with colleagues. Mr. Johnson says they include a trip to London with a male doctor, and Letby says that happened once. And again, that's referring to the doctor who she claimed was not her boyfriend. So then he moves on regarding this social timeline, and the social timeline, as I say, was shown to the court. You had what looked like an Excel spreadsheet with a lot of different entries. So just to go back to the live reporting and how it was reported at the time, it stated the following. A social timeline is shown to the court detailing meetings with the doctor in Hertford, Cheshire Oaks twice, and London between May and June 2017. Now the next part is something which really stood out to me. It stuck with me vividly. This exchange between Nicholas Johnson KC and Lucy Letby. Another text message is brought up onto the screen, and Nicholas Johnson says to Lucy Letby, "I want you to read this text message, please." To which Lucy Letby then starts reading out a text message that she had sent to the male doctor, which reads the following. "I'm near the park next to where you are. Let me know where you are, finishing up, and I'll see you outside." The doctor replied, "Okay, will do, see you soon." Nicholas Johnson then said, "You missed a bit?" And Lucy Letby was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Okay, will do, see you soon." And then he said, "You missed a bit?" And then she said, "What, the emoji?" And then he said, "Yes. What does it say, please?" And she said, "It's a love heart." And he said, "Still not your boyfriend?" And she said, "No." And then he said, "Okay, and what did you reply?" And she said, "I replied with 2 emojis, a smiley face and a heart." "Still not your boyfriend?" And then she said, "No, he's a married man, blah, blah, blah." It's at this point that then Mr. Johnson said, "You were living, or you had a very, very active social life, didn't you?" To which Letby eventually agreed. Letby says a future date on the Facebook diary for September 2017 was listed as a trip to London, but they had to cancel as the doctor had a medical appointment. So again, this is talking about another date in her diary for a day trip or a trip to London with this doctor. And on this occasion, Lucy Letby said it had to be cancelled because he had a medical appointment. She again denies that he was her boyfriend. Nicholas Johnson then says, "You have deliberately misled the jury about this background." Letby replies, "No." "You have also deliberately misled them about the circumstances of your arrest, haven't you?" To which Letby replied, "No." Nicholas Johnson then moves on to the subject of Lucy Letby's arrest. And again, this is something that I can recall very vividly, the exchange between Nicholas Johnson and Lucy Letby regarding her first arrest. Nicholas Johnson said to Lucy Letby, "I want you to recall your first arrest, please. What took place?" And Lucy Letby was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "I've already done this, I've already said this." And Nicholas Johnson said, "Yes, but that was a long time ago. I want you to recall the events again, please. I want you to tell this court." And Lucy Letby said, "The police knocked on the door at 6 a.m. and I was taken away." And he said, "So, and what were you wearing when the police took you away?" And she said, "I think I was wearing a nightie and a tracksuit and trainers." And then as soon as she's getting towards the end of her sentence, Nicholas Johnson then stepped in again and said, "That wasn't what you told the court, was it? You told the court you were taken away in your pyjamas. You were taken away wearing a blue Lee Cooper leisure suit, weren't you?" And Lucy Letby was quiet, and then she said, I'm not sure." Mr. Johnson then says, "We can play the video if you like." And Lucy Letby immediately replied no, like very quickly. She said no. So then Mr. Johnson then reiterates, you were taken away in your blue Lee Cooper leisure suit, weren't you? And then he talks about, for the 2019 arrest, it says Letby agrees she was not taken away in her pyjamas. Nicholas Johnson then said, why did you lie to the jury about this? And Letby replied, I don't know. Letby then said, which I found quite interesting, Letby then says it was the first arrest when she was taken away in her pyjamas, to which Nicholas Johnson then said again, do you want to watch the video? And Letby then doesn't respond. Nicholas Johnson then says, and I remember this word for word, you are a very calculating woman, Lucy Letby, aren't you? To which Lucy Letby replied, no. You tell lies deliberately. And the reason you tell lies is to get sympathy and attention from people. Mr. Johnson then said that Letby was killing children to get attention. Lucy Letby replied, I didn't kill the children and I didn't harm any children. To which Nicholas Johnson then replied, you're getting quite a lot of attention now, aren't you? Okay, so we're going to leave this video here for today, but before I leave, I just want to expand a little bit on the reporting restrictions regarding this case. Now, at this point in time, as this is still an ongoing case, I cannot be sharing with you my own thoughts, my own feelings on what has taken place in this process, who has said what this means, all that sort of stuff. I cannot do that. The reason for that is because, above all else, having sat there in person and listened to the names of these families, the children, the parents, having seen the parents of Lucy Letby, having seen her, having seen all of these people who are involved in this case, the most important thing for me at this stage is that a fair trial is conducted. And due to reporting restrictions, as this is an ongoing trial, as I said at the start of this video, I can only report on what the jury has already seen and heard. So please bear that in mind, as I say, if you re-listen to this video. I will be covering this case again when the court is back, which I believe is on Wednesday. So do look out for that video. As always, many thanks for joining me for this video. If you're interested in the case of Lucy Letby and you wish to follow it further, please don't forget to subscribe down below. And I'll see you all again in the next video. Take care. Cheers.